The android invasion brings us another story right from the heart of season 13, where the Doctor and Sarah Jane attempt to get back to Earth and actually succeed in making it to the right year this time. But when they get there, they find that things are off. And I love how this is shown and presented in the first part of the story. At the beginning, they notice more little things like the smell after rain when the ground is dry and people carrying around money, all of which was made in the same year. But the episode gets really intriguing when they discover this seemingly quite empty town. They're wandering around and haven't been able to find anybody yet, which is obviously quite odd. And this entire first part was really interesting to me because it manages to have some honestly quite cold and creepy moments when they do eventually find people. They arrive at the town in the back of a truck and they walk very robotically and very stiffly, not like humans at all. We get this really great scene in a bar where we see them all being incredibly quiet. It's great. I really love the stuff going on in this village, and I think it serves as a really solid first part of this story with some quite fascinating and kind of eerie scenes. And the story on the whole is quite solid. The following two parts don't do as much to interest me, but they still carry through a good amount of the momentum from that first part and are solid episodes. The main threat that we are presented to in this story is shown in the form of these androids, who shoot at our TARDIS duo using their fingers, which is a bit silly, but I don't mind Doctor Who being just that little bit silly sometimes. And I like the quite simple look of them. They're kind of reminiscent of the look from the third Doctor serial, The Ambassadors of Death. Their design and the way they are presented couldn't help but remind me of that. Oh, and I also quite liked the design of the inside of the android body, particularly their faces, which I think look great. I seem to tell you this every week, but I'm in love with this TARDIS team. They are just so much fun to watch, and I absolutely adore these two together. And that holds true for this story as well. I mentioned this in the previous serial, but this one also does a good job of balancing what characters get to do. I think it's important to not sideline the companion frequently, and to actually let them be involved in the story, and I felt they did a great job of that in this one, giving a good balance between these characters.
But we're miles away from Unit HQ, though. So, what are we going to do?
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Watch the bramble. Ow! I told you to watch the bramble.
So the first part of this one is great, and as the story continues, it reveals more and more about the situation our characters have found themselves in. And I think it does a solid job of paying off what has been set up in the first part, as well as developing the story and introducing new elements in a way that builds upon itself and results in a final part that is really interesting and a lot of fun. And this one really is fun and engaging throughout the entire 4 parts, though some episodes definitely stand out more than others. I know I'm giving you a spoiler warning rather early in this review, but a lot of what I want to get into I think would be more enjoyable in this story if it's not spoiled for you ahead of time. So if you haven't seen this one, feel free to skip to the time as shown on screen if you want to avoid the spoilers, and if not, then let's continue. Though the androids we meet early on are the main threat for the first part, it is revealed that there is a bigger threat behind all of this, somebody in charge. And for me, this character didn't add a lot of value to the story. I didn't find him to be particularly compelling as a foe, but I do think he worked well enough. I definitely prefer what I got towards the beginning of the story, but I get why they felt the need to have a person in charge, and that wasn't the part that I felt didn't work. It was this character specifically who just wasn't the most interesting. As said, he's alright and you need somebody in that position for the story they were trying to tell here, but I kind of wish it was more than a character who is just kind of there. But the actual story and motivations behind what he is doing makes sense, and that all tracks well. By the end, I wasn't as negative on that character, but he still never really clicked with me, even though I understand what he is doing and why he would be doing it. It's a bit weird, honestly, because on paper, he should work better for me than he does, but somehow in execution, he just doesn't.
While you are making your small contribution to Kral culture, I shall be on my way to destroy the humans that you have so often defended. This time, you will be powerless to help them.
What we learn is that they are going to attempt to invade Earth, and that this isn't even the real Earth. And because they have these android copies of people who at first it seemed were possibly just mind-controlled individuals, that allows them to bring in characters like Harry and Benton to fight against the Doctor and Sarah Jane. And bringing in these characters was an interesting choice. At first I wasn't quite sure how to feel about it because they honestly just don't do all that much, and ultimately it is kind of a bit of fan service, but it also does serve to set up that they can copy human bodies as androids, which is important for this one. So while I'm not the biggest fan of bringing back these actors for them to ultimately not do very much, they weren't completely wasted and did at least tie a little bit more into the final part of the serial. So I enjoyed their presence, but I do think it is a bit of a shame that their final appearance is in a story where they aren't all that heavily featured. There is this astronaut character that we meet relatively early on, and he is prominent throughout this serial. He did work for me quite well because he's the character of the story that is manipulated quite a bit into helping the villain further his own goals. He never thought that they were going to wipe out humanity. He didn't even know about the virus. And the character has spent this entire story wearing this eye patch. And I thought it looked a bit silly, but I didn't take much issue with it. However, it gave us this great scene where we find out he never actually lost his eye. That was just part of the narrative that he was brainwashed into believing by the villain of this story. It was a great moment, and I found this character to be pretty good for most of it. Episode 2 ends with the reveal that Sarah Jane is actually an android, which you could kind of see coming, but it was still a fun moment that I quite enjoyed. What I liked even more is what was done with these copy androids in the final part when everybody makes it down to Earth and Sarah Jane is confronted not just with a copy of herself, but also with a copy of the Doctor. And I found this to be a delightfully creepy scene, and I just love the presentation of it as Sarah Jane talks to the android Doctor and his dialogue reveals that he definitely isn't that character. And in the background we see her copy rising out of her pod. I think it's such a well-presented scene, which I loved. It's probably my favorite singular moment from this entire thing.
Don't do things like that.
I'm sorry. I had to be sure you see there's a replica of you around somewhere.
Well, my replica wouldn't be as glad to see you as I am. What's that?
The rocket is coming into land.
Oh, we better hurry if we're going to warn them.
It would suit our purposes better if no one was warned.
And I really liked so much of what was done at the end of this story. One of the ways this serial keeps you invested is by providing new information to you periodically and by spacing it out such that they are able to keep you invested throughout this entire thing. And the mystery of this town is, I think, quite well paid off in the end. But I really like how the story takes our characters to the real Earth because of this invasion, and it's interesting because from a story perspective, it's like they're going to another location. But it doesn't require much in the way of extra sets other than the rocket because the location of Earth is the same one that has been recreated. I thought that was kind of a clever way to make the story increase in scale by taking our characters to another planet and starting the invasion, but without having to put forth the extra cost of going to a different physical filming place. It's kind of smart of them to have this story set up in a way that they can do that because it allows them to do more within this narrative, so I thought that was well handled. And the way the invasion plays out and everything to do with the final part of the story was really interesting to me. I love how Sarah Jane and the Doctor have to hide on this spaceship and use the pods because it's the fastest way for them to get to Earth without the TARDIS. And there's this great moment on the spaceship where you first catch a glimpse of the android Doctor. And it's very brief, but it's a great setup for what is going to happen later in the story. And they have a lot of fun with the scenes of the android Doctor and the real Doctor. They actually get into some fights together, and I mean some real fights. It's honestly just a lot of fun to watch, though it is the kind of action stuff that you'd expect to see with Jon Pertwee. I just had a blast with it. It was kind of great to see the Doctor be confronted by himself, albeit in an android version. I also liked seeing the Doctor use his own android in the climax of this one after having reprogrammed it. That was a fun little surprise. And I think what this serial does best is just be really fun and engaging, while also having some creepy elements within it. Not everything is perfect, but it's so much fun that it is easy to forgive the elements that aren't as great. For example, early in the story, there's a scene where Sarah Jane gets distracted and leaves the TARDIS key in the lock, and it just doesn't really make sense. I mean, I get the story needed her to do that for the rest of the serial to play out the way that it does. I just wish that they had found a better way to make it happen organically, as opposed to this artificial way that it's presented, where it's very clear they need the story to get from A to B, but evidently didn't think of a clever, or at the very least, realistic way to portray that. And that's kind of a little unrealistic thing, but there are some little things that are great, like when Sarah Jane tries to let the Doctor out of the disorientation center, and one of the levers she turns actually increases the effect of the device, so she has to quickly pull it back. It's a really small thing, but I thought it was a nice touch because obviously she doesn't really know what she's doing with that device. It is a bit of a shame that when making this story, they didn't get a chance to film a scene that would have explained some important information about the invasion coming to Earth, because it leaves the story slightly unresolved, even though I still felt largely satisfied with this one on the whole. It by no means ruined the experience, but I think it would have helped this story had they gotten the chance to film that scene. Overall, I had a really good time with this one. This was very well paced and had many interesting developments as it progressed throughout its 4 parts. I really enjoyed how much fun this story was while also providing some creepy moments, and a good deal of intrigue that actually pays off and ends in a rather satisfying way. Our main duo is as great as always, and I loved seeing them together in this serial. I found this to be a really solid one, and I'm going to give The Android Invasion a rating of 8.25 out of 10. Definitely a good story, but sadly one that doesn't seem to get as much love as it probably deserves. So what are your thoughts about this one? Whatever you have to say, I am looking forward to reading it. And that's all for now, folks. I hope to see you around, hopefully this upcoming Sunday, for a review of The Reign of Morbius. I might get too busy, it might get pushed back, but my goal is to get it out Sunday. But if I don't see you around for that or any other future videos, that is completely fine, so long as you know that I appreciate your time here today. And with that said, thank you very much for watching, take care, and have a lovely week.